So today we're going to be taking a look at a scenario where Russia collapses. Now Russia is arguably the second strongest country in the world, but what would happen if it just simply collapsed? Right now they are occupied in a war with Ukraine, which has had different political effects across their country and certainly has brought up a question like this before. Now I don't believe, and I don't think anyone really believes, that Russia is close to collapsing or is even on a path towards collapsing, although recently there has been some stuff happening from within and internally with the citizens which might point to signs of collapse. But once again, I don't think they're going to collapse because that's just simply improbable for a country like Russia. They're too strong and politically stable enough to not do that, maybe. But we're going to take a look at this hypothetical scenario today. So if you guys do enjoy this video, make sure to leave a like on it and subscribe to the channel if you're new. All of the support is greatly appreciated. Merry Christmas to everyone that celebrates it. I don't think I've ever posted on Christmas before. I don't think it's ever aligned with Christmas. But you know, it's Wednesday, December the 25th, which means there needs to be an AdizzPro video, and that there is, so Merry Christmas. Also, make sure to drop any suggestions that you have in the comments below, and watch out for either December the 30th or 31st. I will be hosting a end of the year stream on this channel, so make sure to stop in if you can. Without further ado, let's go ahead and jump straight into this scenario. Alright, so like I said, arguably Russia is the second strongest country in the world. That is according to a lot of numerous rankings across the internet. Now, do I believe Russia's number 2 in the world? Not really. That's mostly because of their performance in Ukraine. I would argue that China is probably way more stronger than Russia is. However, Russia is also the largest country in the world, and by a lot. So it collapsing is very interesting. It brings up an interesting scenario, so that's why we're kind of doing a video on it. Now, how exactly would Russia collapse? Well, it all starts with this country right here, Ukraine. They've been at war with Ukraine for almost 3 years now, which has a lot of years. They have made pretty good progress. You know, they took over Crimea, they took over the Donbass area, and they've taken over a lot of southern Ukraine, but that was a couple of years ago. I think they've held on to these regions for way over a year now. They had the Kyiv offensive early on in the war, but that failed. But it's pretty much been a giant stalemate, and as of recently, Ukraine has even started to push into Russia and like this area, I believe. That's interesting. Not sure why they're doing that, but you know, go off, I guess. But this is gonna kind of lead to our fictional collapse of Russia. So let's just say that they continue on with the Ukraine war and they start to lose ground to Ukraine. Let's say that over time, Ukraine starts to push back. They take back the major city of Mariupol and even push towards Crimea and eliminate any Russian threat in the Donbass area, pushing them back to their border. This is a major counteroffensive by the Ukrainian armed forces, and it sends ripples across Russia as it looks like they might be losing the war in Ukraine. Shortly after, they are kicked completely out of Donbass, and Ukraine starts a counteroffensive into Crimea, land which they have not held control of since 2014 when Russia invaded the peninsula. After a few treacherous months of battling, Ukraine wins in Crimea, and now Ukraine starts a counteroffensive into Russia. This is due to the fact that Russia has not accepted any peace agreements, so slowly but surely Ukrainian troops start to pour into Russian territory, and this is where our split begins to happen. Alright, now realistically, Ukraine's not going to be able to pull off like a significant counteroffensive. I don't think it's possible for them to get Russian troops out of their territory as of right now, even with all the NATO funding they are receiving. I don't think they can pull off the counteroffensive. So this is where the fictional aspects come in, because once again, Russia collapsing, first of all, that's not very likely at all. But we have to go even further and add in some even more unrealistic things like Ukraine winning the Ukraine war. That's probably not going to happen. Who knows though? War is pretty much you never know with war. It's hard to really predict, especially this war. We really didn't think Ukraine would last this long, but here we are 3 years later. So with Ukraine's advances into Russian territory, political turmoil starts to take place in Moscow. We'll say it's somewhere in here. And slowly but surely, Putin begins to lose power. Now, that's also extremely unlikely. Putin has solidated his power. He is pretty much installed himself permanently in the Russian presidency. So I don't think he can really lose power, but let's say that a civilian or maybe parts of the government break away and they start to uprise. They get funding and troops, or maybe not troops, but maybe like resources, supplies from outside countries like NATO and Ukraine. And slowly but surely, this rebellious momentum starts to skyrocket. And eventually, Vladimir Putin is removed from power somehow. With Putin gone, there is a giant power vacuum opened up in Russia, which has multiple people attempting to take that spot of president, and this is going to fracture the country. There are a lot of movements within Russia, actually, like in Chechnya, where people want to break away. Russia is a very diverse country, and after the collapse of the Soviet Union, We obviously saw a bunch of countries get their independence, from all the Stan countries down to the Caucasus countries, Belarus, Ukraine, and of course the Baltic states. They all got their independence, but there are a ton of other nations within Russia which wanted independence, like once again Chechnya, that didn't get independence because they weren't actual Soviet states, they were departments of the Soviet Union. So we can see those groups maybe start to pop up. It now ends the Ukraine war and begins the Russian Civil War, or maybe like just straight up the Russian collapse, whatever you want to call it. There was already a Russian Civil War, so let's just call it Russia's collapse. We are going to color in the Russian government blue since they are defending against the rebellions. And our first little breakaway was actually going to be Chechnya. Now, Russia has done some things here, not classified by the United Nations as genocide or ethnic cleansing, but it's pretty close. So Chechnya breaks away from Russia, or they start the process of breaking away from Russia. We also see Georgia get involved in this as a country which of course has been invaded by and is currently being occupied by Russia in certain territories like Abkhazia over here and South Ossetia. Like I said, Russia does control this territory in Georgia currently, which is all the more reason Georgia would get involved in Russia's potential collapse. We would also most likely see Ukraine get involved in this, for Crimea's reasons, of course. But since the Ukraine war did already conclude in this scenario, I'm going to go ahead and actually just color back in Crimea, just to make it a little bit more interesting. So let's say that Ukraine actually didn't get Crimea, and now they're joining this war in order to get that territory. So now all of the countries which Russia has any kind of involvement in, like Ukraine and Georgia, are involved in Russia's collapse. I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm going to say that I don't know too much about these separatist movements in Russia. I don't think there are too many anymore, but based off of Wikipedia, which we know how teachers tell us that Wikipedia isn't the best of sources, even though they do have a pretty good system of fact-checking and updating information if it is wrong. But according to them, there is a separatist kind of movement or battalion in this region right here of Russia, which is the Republic of Bashkortostan. Bashkortostan, I think is how you say that. My bad. It also looks like there is a pretty large movement in this region of Russia, unsurprising. Looks like there might be some movements in Karelia, so we'll color in Karelia as well. And then some stuff over in Siberia. For the sake of this, we'll just color in this region. Now, I don't know if this is where they're actually based or not. I could be completely wrong, but in the lime green, we have all of our separatist movements in Russia. They all kind of pop up, all 5 of them, and they declare their independence from Russia and the Russian Federation. And these guys are going to work accordingly with the red countries. Now, they are not necessarily all on the same team. I'm just color coding them so you know what they are. So green is separatist movement, and red is country that has been invaded by Russia, but is now going to want to get its revenge. Or I guess more so is defending themselves and taking advantage of Russia's collapse. But now enters in a fictional movement. It is a large movement taking place in this part of central Russia, right outside of Moscow. This is the new Russian movement. This is the pro-Russian democratic movement. That's what I'm going to call it. It is a Western favorable group. So these guys would be very favorable with NATO. So keep that in mind. This is important. Of course, blue, we still have the old Russian government, which still has that vacuum for power spot. They don't have a president. You know, Putin is gone. So the blue is still the main Russian government. And because this is Russia, we also need to go ahead and throw in the communists, because communism is still somewhat prevalent in central Russia, I believe. Based off elections. I do believe there was some sort of communist candidate that either won or had a significant number of votes in central Russia. So we'll go ahead and pop up a communist movement in this part of Russia. This is so far the biggest group, but there's also like nobody here. So it's not too much of concern for Russia, but do watch out. Okay, so Russia's collapse is completely underway. Their government is pretty much shattered. They've lost a lot of valuable lands, like mostly over here to the pro-democratic movement. But they've also lost access to the Kola Peninsula via Karelia, and they have a lot of issues in the Balkans, the Caucasian region, because they are pretty much cut off, or in fact, they are cut off from that area. And this piece of land right here is extremely important for Russia. They do not want to lose this. Oil reserves and tons of resources. This is probably Russia's most vital area, and they don't have access to it anymore. Plus, there's also a bunch of separatist movements, which means that the blue government is most certainly crippled. As for Siberia, not much happens over here. Very varsely populated, except for like down in this area. Yeah, it's not looking good for the blue government. So let's go ahead and start some of this war stuff. So right away, the Russian government will send its forces against the purple team. They don't want these guys winning, but they are favored by a majority of the Western world. They managed to push them back in the south and get access to this very important region, so that is good. Elsewhere though, the red countries like Ukraine take back all territory that was lost to them by Russia, and in some small instances even start to push into Russian territory, like Ukraine around the Sea of Azov and near the border of Belarus, taking over this small piece of land. We see Georgia do something kind of similar, going up the coast of Russia and pushing out from the South Ossetia area. These guys will be working with the Chechens and this other separatist group here. Now, in real life, I don't know what Georgia's relation is with Chechnya. I don't know if it's hostile, I don't know if it's friendly, so forgive me for being probably wrong in this case, but Georgia will work with Chechnya in this scenario in order to help them achieve independence and beat back Russia, which is the main point of them working together. They want to beat back Russia, they want to get rid of Russia and their influence, or at least force them into a government change. But we also see Russia take moves against the communist powers in Central Russia. These guys are probably the weakest faction that exists in Russia right now, so they lose a significant amount of land, going all the way back to the border of Kazakhstan. Now, at this point, the international world will start to kind of get involved. Now, China is going to obviously fund the communists, whereas NATO and other Western countries are going to fund the purple team, which is absolutely huge. They will do so via Ukraine, which makes Ukraine actually go ahead and invade some more territory of Russia in order to share a border with the blue or purple separatist movement. So this way, NATO can go right through Poland into Ukraine and into the purple country in order to give them troops, supplies, or any resources that they need. Now, NATO will also be helping out the separatist movement over here in Karelia. Of course, this is very easy for them to do since they share a border with Finland. And the result of this is a stunning Karelian victory throughout their entire region. Now, Karelia is actually huge. This is about how big it is. But they will also now go into the Kola Peninsula area and take out that entire thing, basically achieving their goals of beating back the Russian government in their respective province. But from here, they will kind of move around a little bit and hit this lake, cutting Russia off from northern supply and access to, I almost called it Stalingrad. It's actually Leningrad, but now known as St. Petersburg, so I was wrong twice. But that's not really important though, because I don't think Russia would need northern access to the city, since they can just, do that instead. Now, what is Belarus going to do in this war? They kind of like Russia. In fact, they do. So they're going to join on the side of the blue government, and they will begin to help out Russia push back against both the purple country and Ukraine, which kind of makes them at war with Ukraine, but not necessarily. Oh, okay. Ukraine disagrees. So Ukraine will actually declare war on Belarus, saying that you killed Ukrainian troops in Russian territory, which, we're not supposed to be there. Our fault on that, but you still killed our troops, which means it's war. We're going to war with you. And Ukraine versus Belarus head-on is not going to end well for Belarus at all. Ukrainian troops storm up and take the capital Minsk, but not before Belarus notices that there might be a few NATO troops within the mix. So Belarus is going to say, hey, NATO is fighting against Russia now. Is anyone going to do anything about that? And the answer to that is absolutely not. Now, why? You could argue that India and China would have something to say about NATO's involvement in the Russian collapse, but China is also involved. They're funding the communist rebels. India could probably care less. They share a pretty even split between the West, or more so the United States and Russia. It's about a 50-50 support. They kind of play both sides, which is extremely smart. But with Russia's collapse, they would probably just stay out of it because, yeah, it's a mess. But Ukraine is storming through Belarus, and eventually they force the country into capitulation and use it as a staging ground to invade further into Russia. So Ukraine is very much taking advantage of this war. And with Belarus's collapse over here in the West, it leads to the purple team's large, swift sweep throughout Western Russia. And at a certain point, they reach all the way up right here near St. Petersburg, which is a huge blow to Russia as they lose access to both the Baltic Sea and their major city. Elsewhere though, Russia is staging a pretty large counteroffensive in the central region, and it goes extremely well. They also push back Ukraine a little bit near the Sea of Azov. They also take out this separatist movement over here. Over here in the east, we see the complete abandonment of the area by the Russian government. They aren't really fighting back over here in the east because they can honestly care less. This movement starts to grow into a greater Siberian movement, and it picks up a lot of steam as the rebels move throughout eastern Russia. They took over all of Sakhalin, and eventually we see a new movement pop up in this part of Siberia where nobody lives, but ignore that. And this is the Free Siberia movement. A little bit different from this one. This is a separatist organization, and this one is focused on kind of doing something new over here instead of just like the whole Siberia, which is technically all of this. They just want this part. So there could be a little bit of hostilities towards these guys, but I doubt that there would be since they're fighting the same enemy. This movement starts to pick up steam. Now, of course, like I said, there's like nothing happening here. There's nobody living here. It's too cold. But we're going to ignore that because I said so. They're going to take over the coastal areas, eventually meeting up with the border of these guys. And like I said, they're fighting the same enemy, so they are going to be kind of chill. And I think it's time to finally address this on this map, at least. Russia's kind of cut off here. It does go like that a little bit. Usually that piece is like over here, but at some point a couple years ago or maybe months ago, I just got rid of it. I don't know why it's not just attached right here, but whatever. Nothing really happens there, so it's not that important. All right, so yeah, Russia's in full-on collapse mode. It's happening basically at this point. Now with a connected border with NATO and full-on spending and just straight help from NATO, the purple movement is going to start absolutely kicking butt in this part of Russia. They're going to cut them off again from this important area, which leads to a combined movement forming between Chechnya and this other separatist group, and they start to do a lot of damage in this part of Russia. Eventually, though, they do kind of declare victory and stop their expansion. Georgia goes a little bit more into this area, as does Ukraine. They take over a big chunk, but most of it ends up falling over to the purple team, and they get access to all the important resources. But now we see yet another movement begin, and this is NATO's direct involvement. They are no longer hiding it. They are just straight up getting involved. They will take over Kaliningrad, and then they will then move in to this remaining part of Russia, taking over St. Petersburg and all of this surrounding area. With NATO's direct involvement, it pretty much spells out defeat for Russia. They will now move their troops onto the front line of the purple team and fight with them to basically take Moscow and end the war. Russia has officially collapsed at this point. There are a few maybe mercenaries still running about. That's something that Russia would probably do in this case. But they aren't going to last very long. We eventually see China start to send troops into Russia, hoping to get a little bit of land out of this maybe, or maybe influence, whatever it is. But they don't go too far. They only take just a little bit. The main thing that they do is fund the communists over here in central Russia, who pretty much explode. Like, they take over a lot of Russia in the central region. This is where they are, of course, most popular, like I said earlier. But after like a few more months of maybe a year of fighting and just getting rid of any military groups still in Russia, we end up with the country looking something like this. The Russian government is gone, the country has collapsed, the Russian Federation is no more, so now we are left with this. Now, when countries tend to collapse, there isn't really a collective agreement amongst the rebels, like in Syria, for example. You know, obviously the rebels did just win in Syria, but there is still a movement up north here, and there still are pockets of different organizations like ISIS throughout the country, and they will continue to fight against each other maybe. So like, just because the Syrian government collapsed doesn't mean that the Syrian civil war is necessarily over, and it's the same case for Russia. Just because their government is gone, it doesn't mean that this war is necessarily over. But with the presence of NATO, which is a huge figure, in fact, you know, the strongest alliance in the world, it is a lot more likely for them to facilitate or maybe even force a peace deal amongst all of Russia, and they might even work with China, which could go two ways. It could improve their relations, or it could drop their relations depending on how they do this. So let's take a look at a hypothetical peace treaty where Russia is collapsed and new countries are formed. All right, and here is our result of the peace treaty following the collapse of Russia. Now, I haven't erased the borders yet, so let me go ahead and just break it down for you guys. First off, we have Karelia. They are released and become their own country, and they are also ceded over the Kola Peninsula region, which is of course not a part of Karelia, but it is now. It's incorporated into them, and I don't know if there's enough people here to really make a stance against that, so oh well. Now, Belarus is partitioned amongst Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and Ukraine, and Kaliningrad is given over to Poland. Now, as for the remainder of Belarus, they are given a new pro-Western government and are more than likely incorporated into NATO. Same thing with Ukraine, they are also probably incorporated into NATO. Now, going down to the Caucasus, we can see things down here are very interesting. First of all, Georgia will take over a slither of land from Russia. Now, I don't know if they really would take land. I don't know if they want to take land from Russia, but they do. And then we have the creation of Karelia and, not Karelia, Chechnya. And then we have another country, oh, I exited out of the tab, which is Dagestan, I think is how you say that. But two new Caucasus countries. This actually looks pretty good. So, yeah, I like this. This map looks fun down here. Totally not going to lead to a bunch of wars or anything, I hope, right? But staying in southern Russia, Ukraine will get this land from Russia. They will also get Crimea back, Once again, not sure if Ukraine would actually take land from Russia in this case, much similar to Georgia, since, you know, they did install a new pro-Western government in Moscow, which is what we see here. This is kind of the new pro-NATO, Western-ish kind of government. It likes the United States. It will work with the United States. So this is what we see here in this part of Russia. Right here, we have the creation of that country that I said earlier, the Republic of Bashkortostan. Don't know if I'm saying that right. But this was a separatist movement in Russia. They now get their independence. Important to say, though, they don't really have this land down here. But I went ahead and gave it to them anyway because it kind of looks good. Now in central Russia here, this is where we have our communists. This is basically the Soviet Union, but not the Soviet Union. It's just a communist version of Russia. And moving over here to the border of China, they will actually annex a little bit of Russia. Now realistically, once again, and much like Ukraine and Georgia, I don't think that they actually would or have any motive to, but they end up doing it anyway and get this land, which looks pretty identical to how they looked before. Can't really notice a difference. And then our last country is a combination between two Siberian movements. They put their differences aside and they ultimately decided that it would be better for them to unite together under one government, in which they did, and they formed the Republic of Siberia. And that's really it for Russia. So they are mostly just divided into 3 different countries, and a numerous amount of republics around Russia also get their independence, like Chechnya, Karelia, and a lot others, including Siberia. And then mostly right here, this is like the remainder of Russia, the core Russian territory, if you will. It was split in half between the democratic forces and the communist forces. So I'm sure that won't lead to another Cold War between the West and China this time, which that would actually be a pretty interesting scenario in this world. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, make sure to leave a like on it and subscribe to the channel if you're new. All that support is greatly appreciated. Remember, next week I am doing the stream on either Monday or Tuesday. Make sure to tune in for that. Leave any suggestions that you have in the comments below. I am pretty much out of ideas for Wednesday videos as of right now, so your input is greatly appreciated. I thought of this video idea 10 minutes before I started hitting record, so that kind of shows you how cooked I am in terms of that. But Saturday videos with the Wisco stuff, that's all good. Don't you worry about that. Speaking of Wisco, that's the Cold War that is ending very soon. So I hope you all are excited for that. Oh, join the Discord server. There is a link to it in the description below. I have attempted to clean it up a little bit. There was some issues before with staff members and stuff like that. Honestly, I'm not active enough in it to really control too much of that, even though it is my server. But I have a manager there that does an excellent job at her work, so she's managing it. Hopefully, it's a little bit better. I try to make it a little bit better. No promises though. And yeah, join with caution, I guess, but join it anyway. There's a lot of different mapping stuff you can do. I think we're trying to do a mapping competition soon enough, so if you want to do a mapping competition, then join the Discord server and ask a staff member about it. Once again, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. And of course, thank you to all our super fans. This includes Freezoy, Zaylance, Georgie Badev, Deathlord182, Serminator, Pablo Sigma Cat, Deathstrider X, HammerToad45, Connor the Gamer, Nevada Garbage Trucks, and DW Cool Dude. Once again, thank you guys.